Their safety concerns amongst Americans as well as lawmakers continue to grow amid these recent shootings. Yesterday, officials announced that Charlie Kirk's killer was arrested in Utah. Tyler Robinson, 22 years old, he's now in custody based in part on a tip from his own father and will face charges for murdering the conservative political activist earlier this week. But another story we were following here: on the same day of Kirk's assassination, a student shot two of his peers Wednesday at a suburban Denver high school before shooting himself and later dying. And on Thursday, more than a half dozen active shooter alerts were reported across the country, including at a number of historically black colleges and universities, the University of Massachusetts and the U.S. Naval Academy. Now, additionally, a bomb threat later deemed not credible was reported at DNC headquarters in D.C., and another bomb threat was directed at the home of the Democratic leader of New Mexico's state Senate. Let's bring in Gene Petrino right now. He's the CEO of security consultant at Survival Response LLC. He's also a retired SWAT commander. Thank you for joining us bright and early here on Live Now from Fox. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Christy.
Given everything going on across the country, as we just heard from lawmakers, they're concerned about attending public events due to safety concerns. Also, Americans really feeling on edge right now. So what needs to happen here at the local and national law enforcement level to make sure that what we've seen this week does not happen again?
Yeah, for far too long, we've focused on a response to these incidents more than the preventative measures that we should be taking. We need to start focusing more on how to identify the threats before they attack. All of these attacks are visible by some pretty clear warning signs that we just tend to typically ignore, and we have to start focusing on those.
Yeah, and I'm showing again here that video from Colorado, that story I just shared here from a bit earlier in the week. I want to start with talking about schools. How can law enforcement collaborate with the schools more effectively to prevent such tragedies like this? Because, Gene, we sadly here, this is not infrequent that we have to report on this.
Yeah, I think that for a long time, schools and law enforcement have been working in silos, and we need to start breaking those down and collaborating with training efforts. If they're not working together, they're only, creating a greater chance of these incidents happening.
When we talk about Charlie Kirk and what we have seen this week with that assassination, your thoughts on that? Because how does a high-profile incident like that impact public perception of safety?
These attacks, they just amplify fear. Despite there being a relatively low incident rate, it might seem like these happen all the time, and of course the last couple of days it has, but the chance of being involved in one of these shootings is relatively low considering everything else that we have going on. But we need to really start focusing on how everyone can work together to identify shooters way before they become a shooter. There's a lot of behavioral indicators, and getting that training on that is probably the most important thing we need to focus on now.
I want to touch on what you just said here, and I want to share this tweet or X post now, from Matt Finn with a Fox News channel, because he shared that FBI Director Kash Patel said they had over 11,000 leads called into the FBI, and now as this investigation progresses, every one of those leads will be run out. As you talk about just the public and the role they play in this preventing these tragedies, as well as leads, as we're seeing here, 11,000 leads. How beneficial is that to law enforcement when they are trying to get to the bottom of these investigations?
These leads are vitally important, and a lot of times they're deemed not important by the public themselves. But the reality is the public is the one that solves most crimes. They call the tips in, law enforcement then follows up on them. So they're really very important, and we need to have, make sure that communication between the community and law enforcement is open.
When we talk about public figures, political figures, Charlie Kirk, very different from President Trump in the sense that he has, Secret Service as protection there. Charlie Kirk, also, though, a very high-profile political figure. He had millions of followers on social media. So when we talk about these high-profile individuals, such as President Trump, such as Charlie Kirk, how does that play a role when it comes to the safety as well as investigations? When we think about Butler with President Trump, how does that level of notoriety play into solving these investigations, or looking into them rather?
Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at the combination of private security plus law enforcement, oftentimes there's a wall between them, and we have to break those down. You know, private security can be incredibly helpful, and law enforcement might not be trained, and vice versa. So having that open line of communication is the way you prevent these incidents from happening in the first place.
I also wanted to ask you, is there any specific training or resources that you believe are currently lacking in law enforcement agencies that could really improve these responses to these shootings? I know we've touched on this a little bit, but what do you think, based on your expertise here, your history, what do you think really needs to change?
We really need to start focusing on behavioral cues and how to identify them. School staff, law enforcement, everyone needs to start paying attention early on. Every one of these shooters identifies some kind of a grievance, and they follow a pathway to violence that if you stop it early enough, these are preventable incidents, and we need to start focusing on understanding the behavioral cues and threat indicators.
And given these this evolving nature of these threats, this increase here, are we really going to see any change from law enforcement? Are they kind of going back to the drawing board, so to speak, really trying to figure out, okay, how can we better implement strategies to prevent this?
Well, I wouldn't say that we're going to go back to the drawing board. Every incident that happens starts a new process of evaluating where they went wrong, or not necessarily where they went wrong, but how things changed and what they can do better next time. So there'll be an after-action report on where the vulnerabilities were that they missed and how these happened in the first place, so they can then better prepare themselves for the next incident.
And as a former SWAT commander, I wanted to ask you, what message would you like to convey to the public regarding safety? You've touched on so much already, but is there a final message you'd like to leave our viewers with?
Yes, I think that we need to start, take a step back and maybe see each other as human beings, not necessarily look at political ideologies or our opinions, and understand that we can have respectful discourse without relating to a violent act. If we don't start changing that, these incidents are going to keep happening. So we need to start finding a way to bridge the gap between different ideas.
All right, Gene Petrino, thank you so much for joining us on Live Now from Fox this morning. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Christy.